What's up guys, Kevin here, and if you clicked on this video, then you're probably like me. You're tired of hearing people argue back and forth about details they only halfway understand, because not only is it really annoying to listen to, but it makes it really difficult to decipher what is real and what isn't. So I did what I recommend most people do. I went to the source, reviewed all the materials, and got a good understanding of it for myself so I could form my own opinion. So in this video, I'm going to share with you more details on what the Trump plan is, what the tariffs are and why they were implemented, as well as both the pros and the cons so that you can understand a little more information and form an opinion for yourself. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Also, I will have links in the video description to articles on the White House website where you can read a little bit more for yourself. I know some of the wording can be a little bit hard to understand, so that's where this video comes in play to try to make it a little more simple and straightforward. But if you'd like to peruse through that for more information than I can share in this video, feel free to do that as well. Now, the first thing we need to understand is what a tariff is, and I think even before that, we need to know how to spell it since so many people are spelling it incorrectly. One R, two Fs. One R, two Fs. Remember that. Don't do it the other way around. Anyway, a tariff is an import tax. So basically any goods that you import into the country will have an additional fee tacked onto it based on the value of the product. So the same way you pay a sales tax as a percentage for products that you order at a grocery store, you'll end up paying a tariff fee on any products that you import into your country. So whether you order it from Alibaba or you buy it from an eBay seller in Canada, you'll basically pay this fee for the value of the product that you purchased. Now, this is a fee paid for by the importer. So again, the same way you pay sales tax yourself for any product you buy, you would pay a tariff for any product you import into your country. And it is also based on the value itself. So I've seen some people confuse this with shipping fees, where if a product is big or heavy, it costs a lot more to ship. That doesn't actually have an effect on tariffs. Really, it's based on the value of the product. So even if you have a small computer chip that's really expensive, the tariff on that is going to be a lot more than like a big piece of wood or something like that. Now, tariffs aren't really a new thing, and it's definitely not unique to the United States. A lot of countries use tariffs as a way to control their import and export trade. So especially countries in Europe, like the UK, you'll end up paying tariffs or fees on any goods that you import. A lot of times it can add up to 30 or 40% of the product, depending on how it's classified, but that is something that's very common across the world. So how does that work into what Trump's trying to do? Well, he has implemented what he calls the America First trade policy. And the whole purpose behind this policy is to help support the American economy. So what he's trying to do is increase jobs, increase profitability, and just bring things more inside of the United States so that we are more self-sufficient and everything is just being built up from inside of the country. So in this policy, he's basically put a lot of different things out for his different secretaries to investigate and determine if we're actually getting a fair end of the deal. Because we have a lot of agreements with other countries and how we manage trade with them, but he feels like we're kind of getting the short end of the stick. And of course, a big part of that is how goods are being imported. Because the way that he looks at the import-export trade, it looks like we're actually in a deficit, and a lot of other countries are benefiting more from having these agreements in place. So primarily, the three countries we're looking at are China, Mexico, and Canada. And those are the ones that he wants to basically determine if we need to redo any of our agreements or even reevaluate if we want to participate in those agreements moving forward. Because if we're not getting a good, fair end of the deal, then maybe it's not the right thing for us. He also wants to try to combat a lot of illicit materials that are coming over the borders and being imported. Think things like Coca-Cola and other illicit materials in that nature. So to protect the Americans and make sure that we're not further having degradation from these things coming in, he wants to put tighter control over how things are imported and just making sure that the process is a lot more foolproof so that people can't find loopholes to get things in the country that shouldn't be coming in at all. It also incorporates tools to help combat counterfeiting as well as stealing intellectual property. So for example, if there are countries that are exporting goods to the United States that are made to represent or copy products made by companies in the United States, that's something that this should help prevent from happening, and even more so motivate the countries to honor our same IP laws so that they won't be able to legally do those practices anymore. So yeah, a lot of stuff built into here that would take a lot of time to work through, but he sent this out to all of his secretaries of the different departments and wanted a result to come back by April. So they had a couple months to figure out what the current state of things were and recommend changes so that they could be put into place to bolster up our systems. However, why is everything happening right now? Why are we all of a sudden having these tariffs turned on and all of these countries are retaliating? Well, the reason is because Trump determined that this was a national emergency. And when it becomes a national emergency, that gives him power to implement changes on short notice. So that's kind of what brought us to this point. We already had a plan that he had been, presenting along his campaign trail, and then he officially published it once he came into office. But by declaring this a state of national emergency with how things were being done in our trade, that's what put him in power to make a change immediately. So how do extra taxes actually support the economy? Well, the main way is that it makes it more expensive to order goods or products from other countries. So for example, as a consumer, like I said, if you buy products from Alibaba or whatever, you will have a tariff on it. But also companies will have tariffs on any imported goods as well. So basic materials like plastics, metals, electronics, computer chips, all of that will have an extra tax associated with it. And most of what we're doing when we import stuff from other countries is trying to save cost. So as things become more expensive to import, that should motivate companies to buy less stuff from outside of the country and do more business with companies inside of the country. That should also help us as consumers buy less products online from outside of the country and work more with American retailers. So the goal here is basically to buy here, keep the money in rotation in the American economy so that we can all help support each other, get more profits for the companies, and just get more sales and more business. Now, as you get more business, of course, that increases jobs. So now you should have more opportunity available because as you increase your profits, you also increase your sales and you need more workers to continue with the growth that should be driven by reducing how much you're importing from other countries. So now you should have less unemployment and more people above the poverty line. And just again, in general, more income spread across helps spread the wealth so we can continue to funnel that money back into American companies. So the goal is kind of to make a machine that just kind of runs itself. This can also help offset the tax burden for people that buy American, because if you're buying stuff from inside the country, you won't have to pay those extra tariffs. Whereas if any companies or consumers do decide to keep importing goods, then they will pay those taxes, and that should offset some of the taxes that would otherwise be owed by Americans that are buying American. So it helps kind of put you in a better place where hopefully taxes can be reduced and other people will pay the bill for you. Another thing I didn't realize until I looked into the details is that there are concessions in the policy for certain markets and certain products. So for example, they specifically list that Canadian energy resources would have lower tariffs, which based on, if certain countries are your primary provider for certain materials or certain things, you might not want to put more tariffs on it because that will definitely have a negative impact on the economy since that's the main place you go to for that product. So if you don't have a lot of it in your country, you don't want to put a big tax on it because that will just trickle down to the customer. So there are things built into the policy that will help avoid that issue. But of course, it's not going to be 100% foolproof. And that's where the cons start building up. So the first thing again to remember is we pay the taxes, and we being the consumer. I know there was like talks about an external revenue service that was supposed to be dedicated to collecting the taxes, and it kind of implied that we were going to be collecting taxes from the other countries for importing goods, but that's not how tariffs work. All of it is paid for by the importer. The only way it might cause them to kind of indirectly pay more is if they have to lower their costs to stay competitive. So instead of charging $20 and paying a $10 tariff, they might lower the cost to $10 so the tariff keeps it at where it was originally priced, and that lowers their profit margin. So in that way, they would be paying for it, but they're not paying extra money to us to make that happen. So hopefully that makes sense. The other thing is these companies in the United States are not going to take a big tax cut. So we're most likely going to end up paying more for the same resources simply because they can't get it for cheap from other countries. So they're either going to pay more for it to import it, or they're going to pay more for it to work with American companies, and that will translate to the price of the product, which will go down to the end consumer. Now, it's not always going to be that simple because the actual value of a product is determined by the consumer. So if you make it too expensive, then the consumer just won't buy it. And that's where you have to go the opposite direction and cut out your bottom line to preserve your profits. So that's where you start seeing things like pay cuts or potentially even layoffs, which of course is the direct opposite of adding more jobs. So it really depends on how that balance is determined, what the price of the product is, how many workers you can actually afford, and finding that middle ground. And then the last con is probably what a lot of you have seen recently is the retaliatory tariffs. So if a country feels like you're trying to impose a tariff on them that could negatively impact them, they could in turn put a tariff on imported goods from your country as well. So now anybody that builds products in the United States but exports it to Canada or Mexico or China could see a lower volume of sales because now their products are going to have an additional tax to the consumers in those countries. So really it could limit how far your product can go because you're only going to have a limited market in the United States and everybody outside of the country is going to see less of a demand. So in the end, it really is a balance. You know, there are a lot of pros and cons. It's hard to say exactly where it will end up without actually going through the process. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you have the infrastructure to support your economy, it should be something that you can at least manage. And something I like to remind people is nothing is going to stop inflation. Nothing is going to magically make everything cheaper. Inflation is kind of its own machine that's going to march along with or without us. The only thing you can do is try to slow the process down. So it's not really stopping the prices from going up, it's trying to prevent it from going up as much. So really, you're trying to determine which option will get you there. Now, if you guys have seen the latest news, the executive order is kind of like the rest of the government. It's being delayed. So if you read through the updated memos, you basically see that they say Canada, Mexico, and China implemented changes that kind of satisfied what we were looking for enough to seem like they're taking it seriously and they will make changes that put us in a more favorable position. We still need more time to evaluate if those changes are good enough. So they're delaying any additional tariffs until March 4th. So that's kind of the new date. We're waiting about a month to see if these changes that were put in place are good enough. Otherwise, at any point, the executive order could be reinstated. So we'll just kind of sit and wait and see how that works. But hopefully this explains both the pros and the cons to all of you that really just wanted to see the full picture. Again, there are a lot more details in these policies. So if you want me to talk about that in another video, let me know and we can, continue down this rabbit hole. But I think we're going to have a lot of stuff in store. So I'm just kind of keeping my eyes open, staying up to date as much as I can and doing as much research for myself so I know exactly what's going on. So I think that's it for this video. Thank you guys for stopping by. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.